Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is a Heel Heat Top 10. The topic of this Top 10 WWE/WWF Intercontinental Champions. Start off with number 10, Macho Man, Randy Savage. One of the greatest wrestlers to ever do it. Unfortunately, he's more of a main event guy, didn't have too much time with the Intercontinental belt, but the time he did have with it was very memorable. Like I said, one of the best wrestlers to ever do it, made history. Probably the most important Intercontinental Championship match happened during his reign, and that's at WrestleMania 3 versus Steamboat. Number 9. Multiple time Intercontinental Champion, I believe 4 times total, Goldust. Here was a guy that was probably 5 years ahead of his time when he was doing the Goldust gimmick at first. The wrestling industry caught up with him. He's still wrestling now at a very high level, 20 years later, 25 years into his career. One of the most talented wrestlers that's come down through it. I mean, he stepped out of the shadow of an all-time great in the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, being his son, and made a character that was totally his own, totally memorable, and easily one of the best Intercontinental Champions of all time. Number 8. One of the guys that laid the groundwork for what an Intercontinental Champion should be, Don The Rock, the original Rock, Morocco. Again, a guy that the further we get from his career, the less is talked about, sadly. As a person that's seen a good amount of his career in WWE at least, he was as good, if not better, than anybody on the roster during a time when the roster was absolutely stacked. One of the top tier heels, one of the guys that never really got the chance to move up and become that guy that faces Hogan, other than a couple spots here and there. But he never got the chance to have the runs with Hogan. I think he's very underrated. I think he's one of the best wrestlers of the 1980s. One of the guys, like I said, he laid the groundwork for what the Intercontinental title would be and how important it would be. Number 7, a guy that the WWE probably wants you to forget was an Intercontinental Champion. And that's Jeff Jarrett. Double J, he's double tough. Jarrett, he's been called Shawn Michaels light because of this. He has a very similar skill set. A great technician in the ring, a great wrestler, a great mind for the wrestling business, a guy that wasn't afraid to burn bridges, to stick out and be on his own. I mean, he had a couple runs as the Double J, great character, came back, had a couple more runs. Just a very talented wrestler that held with the tradition of the talent that would have amassed the Intercontinental Championship. There was at a certain point, and it doesn't have the prestige now that it once did, but there was a point that the Intercontinental belt was known as the workers' belt because the best in-ring talent would win the Intercontinental title, not necessarily the world champion. You had guys like the Ultimate Warrior were the world champion, who obviously was an Intercontinental champion too, but some of the guys that may have not been as talented in the ring were in the world title hunt, but everybody that was in the Intercontinental title hunt for the most part were some of the guys that could put on great matches with everybody, and Jeff Jarrett was not any slouch in that matter. Jeff Jarrett can have a great match with anybody. He gets a lot of crap for his TNA tenure and his WCW tenure, but he's actually a damn good wrestler. Number 6. The original Intercontinental Champion won it in a tournament in Rio de Janeiro, Pat Patterson. Like I said about Morocco, this is the guy that laid the groundwork. This is the guy that showed what an Intercontinental Champion should be. A great mat technician, a good talker, a guy that the fans would not leave their seats to see. If Pat Patterson was on the marquee, you knew you were getting a hell of a match out of him. Probably one of the most influential wrestlers in the history of wrestling when you include his time to time behind the scenes. Like I said, the guy that laid the template for everyone that came after. Number 5, Chris Jericho. The guy that's held the belt more than anyone else, I think a total of 9 times. It's not something you think about first off. You think of the Undisputed title run, you think of his WCW Cruiserweight time. But Chris Jericho was a guy that they could put the Intercontinental title belt on, and he could go in and have the next to the main event match at SummerSlam, or the first match on the show at Survivor Series with the belt, and get the fans hyped up to what was coming up. Kind of a throwback to the Ricky Steamboat, Randy Savage era, Tito Santana era, where the Intercontinental Champion was the best wrestler in the business. Again, it wasn't at the times that Jericho had it. Probably he's the best wrestler in the world during those times, and he'll even tell you he was the best in the world at what he did. Number 4, Pedro Morales. It's a name that a lot of people don't realize how significant he is. He's the first ever Triple Crown champion in WWE, the first guy to hold the tag titles, the Intercontinental title, and the world title. He held the world title in the middle of Bruno's 2 historic runs. He held tag championships. He held the Intercontinental title. He was a guy after Patterson that became, again, the standard bearer of what an Intercontinental title should be. Another person, much like Don Morocco, who's, as time moves on and we get further away from his career, he's a guy that people are forgetting about. Hopefully with stuff like the invention of the WWE Network and this website right here, YouTube, we can influence, and other people will go and look up Pedro Morales and see why he would make this list and what makes him so special and so different. Why is he above guys like Randy Savage and Goldust and Chris Jericho that everybody knows? Why is he here? What was his contributions? That's my challenge to you. Look him up if you don't know who he is. Find out why he's so far up this list. Number 3, the bad guy, Razor Ramon. During the early 90s, Razor Ramon helped usher in a new generation in the WWF. He was a guy that had all the talent and charisma in the world. He was one of the best in-ring workers probably the business has ever seen. Unfortunately, later on in life, he ran into some issues. The story of Razor Ramon, Scott Hall, cannot be said without adding that in. But during his time as the Intercontinental Champion, you're hard-pressed to find a wrestler that worked harder and gave consistently better matches than he did. Maybe Shawn Michaels, maybe Bret Hart, but he's in the short list. He's a guy that set the bar on the show. He went out there every night with the Intercontinental title, fought guys like Goldust, fought guys like Shawn Michaels, fought guys like Bret Hart, Jeff Jarrett, all the way up and down, great Intercontinental champions, and he stood out and he gave you the show or the match of the night every time he got in the ring. Number 2, the longest reigning Intercontinental champion of all time, and if you listen to him, the greatest Intercontinental champion of all time. I think he was very special. I think he did great. I think he was a top-level heel, the Honky Tonk Man. What can you say about him? He's cool, he's cocky, he's baggy. He's the Honky Tonk Man. And before I sing his whole entire song, the guy was great. He had a great entrance, a great commitment to a character, great charisma, a great heel that wasn't afraid to look like a pussy. And that's what a lot of times is forgotten in today's wrestling, is that heels are kind of cowards. That's why they cheat. They have to cheat to win because they're not as good as the faces. They're weak, they're smaller, so they have to do something behind the referee's back to get the win. They're not as good. Then when the babyface comes back and beats the guy, makes him look like $1 million. The sad end to the Honky Tonk Man's reign is the utter destruction by the Ultimate Warrior, which Warrior deserved the belt at that time. He was a major rising star. I think they kind of discounted Honky Tonk Man, giving it to Warrior in such a squash match, though. Now, before we get into our number one, if you've seen the show before, we do a little thing called the best of the rest. Basically, these are guys that just barely made the top 10 list. We got Tito Santana. It's been mentioned before. I've mentioned him on here. He's a guy that was right along the lineage of great wrestlers that got to hold the belt. Shelton Benjamin. Kind of a newer guy, kind of the standard bearer through the early to mid 2000s of what the Intercontinental Championship is and what it should be. Probably some of the last, in there, some of the last great Intercontinental title runs were with Shelton Benjamin. And last but not least, on our best of the rest, the guy that I believe is this generation's standard bearer of what an Intercontinental Champion should be, Wade Bad News Barrett. Whether you call him Wade Barrett, Bad News Barrett, he's an outstanding in-ring talent. He's a guy that absolutely makes the Intercontinental title more important by him carrying it. He's a guy that brings relevancy and credibility back to a championship that's lost some of that over the years. I think he's a guy going forward into the future. Who knows how many more Intercontinental title reigns he'll have? Who knows how many world title reigns he'll have? But he's a guy that's brought that credibility and the style and the feel of what an Intercontinental Champion should be back. And before we get into our number one, if you think we left someone off the list, if you think we put someone up too high, rank someone down too low, let us know what you think. Put your comments down there, rate in the box. Tell us what you think. We love to hear what your opinion is on some of these lists and what your opinion is on some of what we do. If you think I nailed it, tell me I nailed it. Now, our number one guy that defines what it means to be an Intercontinental Champion, and in my opinion, the greatest Intercontinental Champion of all time, Mr. Perfect. The fact that Mr. Perfect never won a WWE or WCW World Championship is an absolute embarrassment to anybody who was in charge of the WWE or the WCW at the times he was in those organizations. Absolute top-tier talent, one of the greatest in-ring talents there's ever been, connected with a crowd like hardly anybody can. There's only a handful of guys that come into your organization at a time, maybe 5, if you're lucky, 5 to 10 guys, and your whole company can connect with your crowd as well as Mr. Perfect did. He worked great as a face, worked even better as a heel. He had one of the greatest managers of all time, and Bobby the Brain Heenan with him. He was a guy that just everything he did was absolutely perfect, and the moniker fits him so great. He is such a good talent, it's so insane that he never was allowed to win a world championship. He's a guy that I think, when I think Intercontinental Champion, he's the first image that pops into my mind. He held the belt with dignity and respect and carried it exactly like an Intercontinental Champion should. He exemplified what the guys that laid before him did, the groundwork that they laid. He carried that legacy on, and he also added to the legacy and gave the guys that came after him a template of what an Intercontinental Champion should be and what the talent and the charisma and the overall ring, just a ring general, the overall gimmick could be. There's not much more I could say about Curt Hennig without going into a whole love fest on the guy. The guy was absolutely one of the best wrestlers in the world. Kind of got shafted. It would be the equivalent of today, a guy like Kurt Angle never winning a world championship. It's insane and it's ridiculous. The fact that he never won, that doesn't discount the fact that, in my opinion, he is the epitome of what an Intercontinental Champion should be. But basically, that's all I have to say about that. My name is George Coles, and this has been another Heel Heat Top 10.